Welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, Brenda Slokowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich. Welcome back, everybody, to the Shaping the New York City Skyline podcast. David, Camila, and Brenda here, your hosts.
Hey, guys.
And let's not forget, we're not just hosts, right? We're also attorneys.
Yeah, everybody keep in mind, this is our side job. I spend most of the time in front of a computer answering all of your important questions.
We're very much well known in the field as inclusionary housing and tax incentives firm. That's not all we do. And condo, of course. We have
an extensive real estate knowledge.
To do this kind of work and to talk about it incessantly.
The grind never stops.
Camila practiced immigration law before this.
Yeah.
Right?
I had a little bit of experience in trust and estates.
Oh, really? I had some experience in criminal law.
We're really well-rounded.
No, I just committed some crimes.
That works.
So I had to go through the system.
We do all sides of the law.
So well-rounded.
All the different sides of the law. And mostly real estate, though, at this point. We're inclusionary housing and 421A and other tax incentives.
Not to toot our own horn, but we are super experts.
Yeah.
Let's not forget your experience with litigation.
Yeah, my litigation experience actually has helped a lot more than I had thought, because it's come up in lots of cases where there are title issues, liens and judgment liens or tax liens or mechanics liens, foreclosures, things that are even tangentially involved in a transactional matter that I'm working on will come up with litigation issues. And at least I understand some of it. So it's actually more helpful than I thought. A lot of times I would say, well, it's definitely a plus, but it actually really is. It's really helped me a lot. And the other aspect of the things that Brenda, Camila, and I do are all transactional. We work on zoning lot mergers, license agreements. It's just a side gig. We have a lot of expertise in inclusionary housing and tax incentives, as well as transactional, development transactions. The guests we have are either clients of ours or consultants, architects that we work with.
Connections.
Yeah. People we've worked with together, attorneys, either litigators like
Yeah. This podcast is there to cultivate our relationships and expand our knowledge of the real estate New York City skyline.
I feel like we don't need to expand our knowledge. I want to give some knowledge to the peeps. Give some knowledge.
Okay, we could do both.
To the peeps, to the skyliners.
We're a dual method podcast.
We have lots of reasons for doing this podcast. But the main one, of course, is to just spread knowledge.
Yeah.
Who we learned from not too recently. I mean, this episode, let's call it what it is. This episode was recorded some time ago, but I think is going to be a great one. And this is an attorney who works for our firm. It's Hillary Potashnick.
Such a fresh perspective.
Very fresh perspective. And Hillary was here talking about her career, her experience, and from a female perspective as well, which she was coming up as an attorney in like the 70s.
She was an archaeologist, which is...
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I cannot believe that you remember that. She's friends with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Ooh, are we thinking of a podcast name? Are we thinking of an episode name?
Oh, Hillary Potashnick, archaeologist.
And the treasure of the cove, whatever it is.
Treasure of the cove. National treasure.
Yeah.
That's good. Hillary Potashnick, a national treasure, a Seiden Schein national treasure.
Love it.
That's not
that down.
Yeah, Seiden Schein national treasure. It's long, but we have time to come up with a new name before this airs in a few weeks or so. Hillary's worked with us she does condo and co-op work, and she's had a whole full history of legal career, and she talks without really any filter.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to actually, I think we're going to have to
so
filter.
Funny. I really liked hearing her progression through the legal field of how she started off just working for one person, and then how it evolved into her going to law school and really expanding her knowledge base. And not only as a woman learning from another woman, but hearing her journey from one place to another was very eye-opening.
Yeah, and inspiring too, because we work with her. We have lots of respect for her. She used to be affiliated with the firm. Now she works for the firm. I don't want to go too much into the self-promotion of the firm, but we're a real estate boutique in New York City. We deal with developers, big and small, everybody in between. No matter who you are, from what I've seen, clients all want to get some value for their money. They don't want to overspend. And we're from that pride ourselves on that. We make sure that we are leanly staffed. We only staff as many people as necessary. And yes, in a big firm, you get more staff, you get more coverage and things like that, but you're paying a premium, a very big premium for that. Sometimes they're doubling and tripling on work.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we try to avoid as a boutique, right?
I'll also tell you that because we have such niche teams, you're dealing with one or two people rather than 5 or 6 people as a whole team. You know exactly who to contact. You've got more specialized attention with our 2 to 3 people who are on board.
Yep. You have those specialties. And then at the same time, we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience that go around all those issues, any development issues, whether it's has to do with a license and access agreement for purposes of protecting a neighbor's property or merging a zoning lot and getting air rights from that zoning lot, or processing an inclusionary housing application, or purchasing air rights offsite, or doing MIH offsite or onsite. All those things
on your construction loan for these properties,
Yep.
or your permanent loans or your acquisition loans, all of the above.
Yeah. So all those things, they connect together, and it's nice to be able to have this one-stop shop where you can go to. But Hillary's, we can go back, that circles back to Hillary and her feel good. A lot of the attorneys at this firm get along very, very well. And we have a lot of nice people who work here. Hillary's one of those people.
Definitely.
She's been definitely,
Because whenever we need to give us advice or to help us with actual legal work, she's great.
She's so smart.
she's a seasoned attorney, has the experience, and
We can't wait for you to hear her
Yeah.
interview.
is going to take you soup to nuts from her experience. We've had Alvin and we had Jay here before, and now we have Hillary. These are all 3 seasoned attorneys, and you'll see what kind of caliber of attorney, what kind of quality you're getting when you do retain us to handle a matter. And if you do want us to handle a matter, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, you know our website, you know our email addresses,
You'll have to make it all the way through the episode to hear our email addresses.
or just check the notes,
Right.
or just go on the
Out
internet.
of the internet.
Go into the internet.
Google me.
And without further ado, we got the Potashnick.
Love it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline podcast. Today's guest is Hillary Potashnick from Seiden Schein. Give us a round of applause.
Welcome, Hillary.
Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
for joining us.
Lovely to be here.
and we're happy to have you. And you traveled some time to get here,
Yes, I did.
and we appreciate it. And you have a little bit of an injury. We understand if you have to get up and sit down and just feel relaxed. This is just a cool conversation between Brenda and colleagues. Yeah,
Okay. Well,
fireside chat.
I am very relaxed and happy to be here.
Hillary, we talked a little bit about your biography, mostly because you sent us quite a history, which is jam-packed full of comedy and interesting stories and all of your experience. I was very impressed with it. And there's no place better than to start at the beginning.
What brought you to be an attorney? How did you decide to become an attorney and get into the legal field in general?
Funny that you say that, because I used to be an archaeologist.
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic.
No, I have I have both an English degree and a degree in classics with a minor in archaeology, and that's all I wanted to do.
Was that about the time that Raiders of the Lost Ark came out?
No, I mean, this is 72, 73, 74, whatever, but I graduated, and the first and only dig I went on, which was in Israel in, I think, 73, I found nothing, but then I found a piece of green glass, and I was so excited because, oh my God, ancient glass. And then one of the workers, they looked, says, Coke bottle. Coke bottle. And number one, I realized I was in this for the wrong reasons. And number two, I realized I couldn't afford to be an archaeologist because everyone around me was a trust fund baby and they pay nothing. And I really wanted to be independent, and coming from a less than wealthy background, I wanted to make money and I wanted to do more. I was living in Queens at the time, commuting into New York, and in those days to find a job, any kind of job, you just picked up the Sunday Times on Friday night when it came out. You would go and circle 10 jobs. On Monday morning, you would just call a whole bunch, get 5 interviews out of it, go in, and I did everything because in those days, just having a liberal arts degree meant you were qualified for everything. But the one thing I didn't do was type it. Many jobs expected you to be a secretary, and I refused. And to this day, I suck at typing. Eventually, I ended up in a job with a law firm, had no real thoughts about going to law school or anything, but it was an administrative assistant. Paralegals didn't exist. I was just assisting attorneys, and I started working with Goldberg Weapon in Houston, which is now Goldberg, I don't know, they've gone through so many changes. And they were the certiorari firm at the time.
What is
Certiorari is real estate tax reduction proceedings. So you don't like your assessment, you can't change the tax rate, but you can change the assessment that your building is garnered with. And even then, the whole way that New York City assessed its buildings was shrouded in mystery. And so...
Has that changed?
No. There is no like algorithm. There's no nothing. Nobody knows, to my knowledge now, how the assessors come up with an assessment on a building, if there's any consistency. Nothing. And so there is a very thriving practice in tax reduction proceedings where you go in and you protest as a matter of course, whatever your assessment is in any given year. They reject it. You build up 5-6 years, and then you actually go to appeal this 5 or 6 years worth of assessments with comparable buildings and everything. And they always end up settling at something. But you have to build up, at least this was back in the 70s, 5 or 6 years.
Did it ever happen where you got it without having to appeal? Or
No, the firms worked on contingency. So every homeowner, you should be all protesting every year. Doesn't hurt, might end up getting you a reduction, but you must have protested by a certain time in order to say, I don't like what you've done. And because it's kind of arbitrary, in my mind, the city often ended up settling. And it doesn't hurt the homeowner or the property owner because it's a contingency. The firm took a percentage of the savings you would have had. So it was found money. It was a thriving practice. But their other part of the practice was doing J51s, which was the big way that property owners would get back the cost of their major capital improvement. They could do pass alongs if it was rent stabilization in those days. Now it's not. But it would be a reduction and abatement of the taxes. So that was very much more hands-on then than it was now. My boss, Jack Weapon, would just send me down. I'd bring in cake. I'd bring in, donuts, whatever. I'd meet with these guys. They were all guys. And they were just what you expect building inspectors to look like. They were just sitting around. They weren't out there inspecting most of the time. Went down to 1 Center Street. You just go up to the 21st floor. And you schmooze the guys, you joke around with them, take them to lunch. And
Great job.
it was, and until the day, I still remember I walked in, had been on the train. I was supposed to be going up to schmooze the guys. And on the front page of the Times was a picture of, I think it was like 51 inspectors had been arrested for, they're all doing like the perp work for like bribery and things like that. I don't believe that taking them to lunch or fancy dinners merited collusion on our part. Practice changed a little bit after that.
But you weren't a lawyer.
I was not a lawyer, and Jack Weppram, may rest in peace, said, you got to be a lawyer. You got to be a lawyer. So I started looking at law school. I was out of college about 2 years then.
It's very funny that doing this sort of tax sort of work, which to me sounds monotonous, and maybe it wasn't. It seems a little monotonous, that would then encourage you to go to law school, but perhaps it was this attorney.
Jack Weppram, who was a bigger than life character, he must weigh 300-400 pounds. He made a statement wherever he was, and he was very, very well known in the community at the time. And as a matter of fact, the clients I remember from then, their sons and daughters are now the clients that we work with. David Walentis of Two Trees, I still remember him. Now this is the 70s, coming in, and he was Jack's friend and client, and he was buying up all this Brooklyn property that has now become Dumbo. That he changed the very nature of that Brooklyn area.
Who wanted to live in Brooklyn before that, right?
Well, it wasn't even that. It was like, industrial buildings, and it was just not a place that people were drawn to. And he had a vision, and this is the 70s, so it took him 50 years ago. And everybody's like, oh my God, Two Trees is great. And Jed, his son, is now in charge of it. And His wife, Jane, was like really a mover and shaker also. And they contributed so much, but took 50 years. 50 years. You have to have a vision, a pocketbook, and everything else to bring that to fruition. But through Mr. Weprin, I was also exposed to developers and other areas of it. And I found I had a knack for it. I applied to all these law schools, ended up going to Benjamin Cardozo, which was Yeshiva University's law school. It was not even accredited yet. It was only its third year of existence when I went in. But figured coming from Yeshiva University, it was going to be good quality, good education.
Did you know that real estate was where you were going, so you concentrated on that in law school?
You know, there was very little to concentrate on in law school. They would teach you real property law. I was still working at Weprin's office part-time throughout it, but towards the end, when I was getting ready to graduate, a friend of my cousin opened up his own practice on Wall Street, which was like, there's no solos on Wall Street as a law firm, because he had a couple of clients who were doing blue sky filings for oil and gas deals. And these blue sky filings were registrations with SEC of oil and gas. And he was offering me a lot more money. And I knew that I was graduating. And one of the problems with changing from being an admin or a para to a lawyer within the same firm, sometimes you have to make a lateral move so that the perceptions of the people around you aren't colored by what you used to be. And I love them all at Weprin's office and had great respect for them, but it was time for me to move on. So I spent about a year drafting these prospectuses for stuff under the dirt.
Expensive stuff I lived there.
Expensive, except part of the problem was that the people didn't want to pay you money. They wanted to pay you in stock. So we got a lot of stock. Graduated in 81, took the bar. I was going to be admitted in February of 82. And I talked my way into a job. I actually sat down with Martindale Hubble. I had a lot of practical experience. And it absolutely is. But you know, I wasn't in the feeder system to the fine law firms. And not for nothing, no one from law review in my year passed the bar the first time. But, you know, what can I say?
Let's go busy doing site checks.
Yeah. But so I sit down with Martindale Hubble and I'm looking for, because I had heard about co-ops and things like that, you know, just being in New York, friends, buying stuff. And I said, this is just a prospectus. It's the same thing that I was writing. It's just a different product. And I saw this firm, which was called Bromberg, Gloger, Lifschultz, and Mark.
That's amazing. How did you remember that?
Because it's so melodious. It just, so, and they had a small firm and they would do, each partner had a different practice, but this one guy, Ted Marks, did co-ops. And so I just walked up to the office, which nowadays you can't even get past security to walk into an office building, of course. But I just walked up, I sat there, I said, hi, can I see Ted Marks? And
wait, was that an appointment or anything?
No appointment. I just showed up. I remember the receptionist was a lovely young girl, and she went back, and Mr. Marks said, can I help you? I said, you need an associate. And he's like cracking up. Then I meet all of them, and they're all just like laughing at me. I said, no problem. And I came back the next day, and then I just showed up every day. And on Friday, they hired me.
Wow.
And then on Monday, my first day of work, I'm like, they put me in the, they didn't even have an office for me. They put me in the library. You're like in a conference room, and there's no computers. They gave me a pad, and they just told me to start doing something. And then they all took.
You used to type, of course.
Of course. And I did not type. And they had secretaries and stuff there, so that was cool. And then they took me out to lunch, all four of them. I'm thinking, this is great. And they said, we're giving you a raise. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I worked 3 whole hours and I have blown them away. They said, we just feel bad. You're getting so much less than the secretaries. So, and my starting salary was $18,000. And I was
that with the
thrilled.
raise?
That was with the raise.
What was it before the raise?
16.5. And I was thrilled to get, but you also have to remember, this is 1981. My rent stabilized 1 bedroom apartment at 22 East 22nd Street was $260 a month.
Damn.
And that was, by the way, that was a special rate because Jack Weprin owned the building and a rent control tenant just got it out. And so he didn't raise it very much. Yeah. But I started working this firm. I learned how to do co-op offering plans.
Well, how did you convince them? I know that you would do the blue sky offering plans, and yes, there's some, resonance between the two.
Yeah.
Like,
I said,
how did you convince them to?
I literally said, because this line I have repeated so many times, I said, if I can write it for under the dirt, I can write it for above the dirt. And he gave me an offering plan, and he gave me the regs, the AG regulations, and I compared the two, and I could see it's a flow. It really is. If you just follow the regulations and just write it, you can get through an offering plan by just filling in the facts. Offering plans that time were about 40, 50 pages. Now they're 400 pages. There's a big difference now because of how the regulations and the industry have evolved. And everything at that time is just, and it still is supposed to be just disclosure, just telling any purchaser what it is that they are getting into. So they can't come back and say, I didn't know. And all of the evolving language that is now inserted in offering plans is because people said, I didn't know that. And then the agent said, you should tell everybody else. Start telling people about that. And of course, as laws change or case law changes, whatever, it gets incorporated to both, most importantly, protect our clients, which are the sponsors of these projects. Because if you tell a purchaser up front what the downside could be, they can't come back and say, I didn't know. And to be fair, the purchasers also have an absolute right to know what the effect of any downsides could be. There's very little positive stuff in an offering plan. It's just like any contract. The first page has the facts and the next 12 pages are what happens if.
So as time has gone on, how often does the AG revise its rules? And as time has gone on and the political climate has gotten more contentious, do you find that more rules are being added and more requirements are being added for offering plans?
They rarely update their regulations, the actual regulations. They keep promising, but I don't think, and the people who are currently practicing in the offering plan area in this firm are better with that because I have a different focus now, no action condos. But what they have is policy memos, which is their interpretations of what's already existing. And the policy memos are really what tell you how the Attorney General is going to expect your offering plan to read or how to treat situations that have arisen time after time enough to come to the AG's attention. So
were those policy memos generally written because somebody found a way around something, created an issue, and so a policy memo was issued?
Yes. Yes. For example, after I was with this firm, Bromberg Loger, for a year and change, one of the partners let me go because I was getting married, and he felt that women shouldn't work after they are married.
As a woman, I'm insulted for you.
Thank you. Again, though, a couple of months later, pick up the Times on a Friday, look in and circle the ads that appealed to me. And on Monday morning, I call this company called Time Equities, which is at the time was one of the most active converters in the city because everything was condo conversions, not new constructions. Co-op conversions. And I know that Alvin had spoken a little bit about the atmosphere in the early 80s that surrounded New York. But one of the big reasons why everybody did co-ops instead of condos was that interest rates at that point on all the mortgages that were sitting on all the buildings were in the mid to high teens, 14, 16, 18% mortgages. And since they were fee mortgages, the only way to be able to sell a condo would have been to give free and clear title to apartment owners, apartment purchasers. And the banks weren't willing to give out partial releases because these were too lucrative and interest rates were starting to drop. And so the only way to do that was the sponsors would instead transfer title to the entire property to an apartment corporation. And then the apartment corporation would sell shares in it. And this way the mortgage was maintained, just a new borrower. And the way that the sponsors made some money off of this is they would put a wrap mortgage over the existing building mortgage so that they would be able to get some better value out of the transfers. Every building became a co-op. And in those days, there were eviction plans and non-eviction plans. And eviction plans, you had to have 51% of the tenants in occupancy agree to buy. And a non-eviction plan, you only needed 15% of not only the tenants, but you could count vacancies as well towards your 15%. There were so few eviction plans that actually were able to be achieved that almost everyone had an amendment after a couple of months that said, we're converting to a non-eviction plan.
Right. 51% is very hard to achieve.
51%, which is where we stand right now in New York since the 2019 changes to the rent laws. It's an impossibility. You can't get people to agree on the color in the lobby. You're not going to get 51% of people to agree to convert a building. So conversions is dead right now. But back in those days, we converted 40 or 50 buildings at the time. This was acquisition, conversion, tenant negotiations with some very, very colorful tenant representatives and attorneys. And it was like the same kind of small crew. It was kind of incestuous in a way. It was like the same few attorneys who were doing conversions, the same few attorneys who were representing tenants. And it was a blast. I mean, I loved it because there was so much personal interaction that even when it was contentious, it's kind of fun. Tenants were getting 30% off, 40% off in order to induce them to buy. And the numbers still worked in those days. So the people who were able to buy their apartments in the 80s was the best opportunity of their lives to get a foothold in New York City ownership, which unfortunately is not within reach. Even now, if you do a conversion, they're giving 5%, maybe 10% discounts, but the numbers are huge now and it's out of reach. These were all middle-class buildings, I would call them. Small buildings, some large ones, but older buildings. People were rent stabilized or rent controlled. The difference between what they'd be paying in their maintenance charges per month versus their rent wasn't too big a difference. So it came down to how much they could do for down payments. And a lot of time we did sponsor financing back then, where the sponsor would take back a note. This way they didn't have to go for more, give like 3 years or 5 years. So the sponsor's getting a cash flow. They're able to be in their apartments. They're building up equity. And then by the time they go to refi the sponsor mortgage, especially in those days, the value of their apartments had risen so much that they weren't getting 80% mortgages. They could get a 40 or 50% mortgage to take out the sponsor mortgage. And in that way, we helped build a lot of equity for people who otherwise would never have been able to achieve it. It was great for them as well as for us. It was a really volatile time until like 1989-90 when stuff crashed. And when it crashed, time equities, we were so active. I mean, those were the years when like every other Sunday, like I'd have a quote in the Times, or Francis Greenberger, our president, would have quotes in the Times because we were the leaders in the industry. We also had, and I always admired this about Francis, an enormous amount of integrity and transparency. So when things started going south with the general economic downturn in New York as well as other areas of the country. We got into an economic situation where we could not service the debt on the unsold shares, the unsold apartments that we had in all of these co-ops. And we worked with the Attorney General's office and came up with an amendment that became standard for everybody in New York City, which was a financial disclosure amendment that we were in trouble and that we were going to probably end up giving the unsold shares back to the lenders. You would call it a deed in lieu if it was a condo, but we gave up ownership of the shares back to all the lenders. And there were certain ones who were very, very active back then. Biggest lender for us at the time, I believe, was Crossland Bank. Doesn't exist anymore. And we shrunk from a company that was like 300 people down to a very minimal amount. And Time Equities had a management team, a transactional team. But the brilliance of Francis was he also had expanded into other areas of country, the world. He's international. So Time Equities itself, to this day, thrives and is very, very varied in its actions. But the co-op conversions shut down. The existing co-ops that Time Equities still had ownership in were, for the most part, given up to the banks. And at about that time, I was starting to have children and stuff, and it was a good time to leave. Wanted to focus on my young kids. I have one daughter. A year or two later, I was pregnant with my son when I got a call from a firm called Robinson, Silverman, Pierce, Harrison, and Berman, which is now known as Bryan Cave. And Harold Lubell, who was a partner in the real estate division there, called me and said, "We need you. Crossland is our big client, and they have all these co-op apartments, and they're not in the real estate business. We need to get rid of all these apartments. We need to amend every offering plan. We need to hold auctions. We need to figure out a way. We need to negotiate with groups of tenants. We got to get rid of this asset category. And you know all these offering plans better than anyone." I said, "I am 7 months pregnant. I really don't think I can go and work for a big fancy law firm." And they're like, "You can do it 3 days a week." So I said, yes. And I came in, worked for a couple of months, had my son, took about like 8 weeks, and then came back, hit the ground running. Remember, no computers that I could be online at home, nothing other than a telephone. They just started introducing computers, which was basically only in the office. It wasn't the internet that we could communicate. It wasn't even emails. I mean, it was like for sharing documents. And that was a stupendous firm. I worked very closely with a woman called Erica Foreman. May she rest in peace. She just passed. She was the condo expert. We had actually worked together and done some deals at Time Equities because they represented Bing and Bing, which owned some magnificent properties in the village that they converted to condominiums. And we were joint venture partners with them on that. And that was like the only condo experience I had. But once I was with Robinson, we spent a lot of years doing a lot of very creative kinds of negotiations and deals to get people to buy these apartments. The issue with the unsold share apartments in these non-eviction plan conversions is they had rent stabilized tenants sitting in them. So the value of a co-op apartment that is vacant versus one that has a tenant in there that might be there for a very long time, that might pass it on to their children, it's discounted dramatically. It was probably 30% of what the market value is what the value of those apartments were. So we had a lot of auctions where people could get apartments very, very cheaply. But you're also now a landlord with all that comes with it. The upside being, you might get a vacancy. And so that was part of the risk. But so it took a very long time. And the banks ended up still owning a fair amount, but at least we were able to set them up with managing agents, things like that to help them manage the inventory while they had it, taught them or their teams how to be landlords, at least for a time, and eventually were able to reduce their stock dramatically. There were players who came in and bought bulk groups of unsold shares. Even now, they change hands once in a while. You know, you got 10 units left in this building. There's 13 in that building. They'll change hands.
Was it just the economic downturn in the late 80s that created this gluttony of shares that were unsold? Because it sounded like it was going really well for 8 years. So I assume that it was affordable. People were buying. Was it just the economics of it in the late 80s that caused that downturn?
Well, there was all crisis. I'm trying to remember. Been through a couple. I'm trying to remember if there was a bank crisis. I'm trying to remember what. And
But it was a financial issue, and people couldn't really afford to buy those shares, right?
Well, the people if a building's converting, let's say it has 100 units, and you only need 15% of those people to buy, so then maybe there'll be 10 tenants, and maybe you got a couple of vacancies. So now I got like 16 apartments, let's say, that are under contract, either with the tenant or with outsiders. If I can't get a lot more tenants to buy their own units, I can convert the building. But now the sponsor is an owner of 85 units that have tenants in them that may or may not, and chances are not, paying an amount that is equivalent or more than the maintenance charges that now are allocable to that unit. So where you actually had like a market rate apartment or maybe a rent stabilized apartment that turned over a couple of times, and in those days you were able to get vacancy increases. So then let's say the rent was $2,000 a month, but your maintenance charges were, $1,100 a month. So yes, there's an upside, but the negative carry is what killed a lot of the sponsors, because the actual cost, and same thing right now in New York, the actual costs of operating a building are not necessarily less than the amount of rent you are legally allowed to get from tenants. And if there's no ability for landlords to raise the tenants' rent to an amount that helps them carry the building, you're getting into where we are right now, which is it's untenable because prices always go up, services go up, insurance goes up, property taxes go up. Where is the money coming from? And that's part of what led to a big downturn in the 90s, at least for me and that firm. And even when the lenders were holding it, I mean, the lenders are paying the maintenance and they are collecting less rent than they're paying out. They had to fire sale these in order to get someone who, at least if you're buying an apartment that would have been worth in those days $100,000 and they pay $30,000 for it, well, at least their debt carry is very little, and hopefully enough that it's not a negative carry from the tenant that's in there. It was also the era of buyouts of tenants, not the strict rules we have nowadays. Basically, we could put out an amendment to offering plan saying, everybody with a one-bedroom apartment will give you this much for $10,000, $15,000, whatever. As long as you made the offer to everyone in a like category, you were allowed to do it. I don't know how different it is now. I do know this much, much stricter. Could have been. I'm happy that I was only involved with firms with great integrity, sponsors with great integrity. Really didn't have a problem with anyone playing games, but that's obviously not the case around town.
You now work in the no action letter space rather than the offering plan space. Can you distinguish the two and
yeah, well,
tell us how you got that?
Yeah. So after I was with Robinson Silverman, I left and set up my own firm, which is the beauty of having a license to practice law is if you stop one thing, you could always hang out a shingle and do your own thing, which is what I did to allow me to be with my family, make my own hours. Robinson and I parted ways because at that point they said, you know what, you got to come in 5 days a week. And I said, no. Set up my own firm for a couple of years. Then I was invited to join Star Associates, which is a major condo offering plan practice. And I was recommended, we interview, it's a nice fit. And now I learned to do condominium offering plans, which were very different than co-ops. Same thing with like an apartment somewhere, but now you're talking about fee ownership versus corporate ownership, shares of IBM versus you bought a house. It's a house in a box in the sky, but it's still your house. And it was a very interesting change for me. I was introduced to Alan Starr by a mutual acquaintance. He was looking for someone. I was doing co-op offering plans, so really not a big shift. It's just, you have to sit down and learn. Give me a week, I'll learn it. But it was interesting because now I'm working with architects. Everything else I had done to then was existing buildings being converted to some different kind of legal ownership. This was new development, which I had never been involved with before. And it was very exciting to have a hand in something that's going from the ground up, be part of the creative process in terms of talking with the broker and the architect and the owner. How many one bedrooms? What about the sight lines? All that kind of stuff. And getting to clamber around in a hard hat once in a while to go and check out the site. It was always a lot of fun. Don't wear heels. Don't wear heels.
Rookie mistake.
Very rookie mistake. But
I'll try to take
that
to it.
That also introduced me, to a whole different group of clients. And I was there for my typical 5 years. And when we parted ways, I then, again, just set up my own firm doing plans. But now I was doing more condo plans because co-ops, there's no new development co-ops because there's no need to be. Co-ops come with the, everybody has a horror story about co-op boards, most of which are true. Co-op boards are a little fiefdom for the right kind of mindset.
You served on a number of them.
If 70 is a number of them, yes, well over 50. So we converted Tudor City, which is a massive bunch of huge Gothic-style buildings between 40th and 42nd Street, all the way by First Avenue, like right across the street from the UN. Teeny little apartments with no kitchens because they were built for people they all had houses and estates. This is like the turn of the 20th century. There were no windows that looked east because the slaughterhouses were down by the river below it, so that what we would now consider prime river views and go looking out over Queens, no windows because of the odors and the disgusting nature of what was happening below. But they also were magnificent buildings at the time they were built. They have 5 levels below ground because they had dumbwaiter systems, like food was prepared and would come up to your apartment, which is why they only had like a sink. And even then we had to order, when we were renovating apartments, we had to order custom kitchens that would fit into it with a 2-burner electric stove. And they all had Murphy beds.
Wow.
Because there was no room. These are the teeniest apartments, but also some of the most magnificent apartments in terms of the height of the ceilings, the beautiful views over everywhere else.
And compensate for the other.
The penthouse had 30-foot ceiling. It was triple height windows looking out over the city. Magnificent, but it was only 1 bedroom. That was like a big apartment.
It was 10 square feet.
It was all volume. But the tenant negotiations were so acrimonious. Harry Helmsley owned those buildings, and there are 2 private parks there. And he was threatening to build new buildings on these private parks. And so the entire city, tenant organizations, whatever, were aligned in public protest. I'm talking about laying down in front of the bulldozer, that
chaining yourself to a fence,
and a lot of big personalities who would then turn around and become, when we came in as white knights and we dedicated the parks to a conservancy so that nothing could ever be built on them. That made us the good guys. But it doesn't matter if you're the good guys, you're still trying to sell them apartments and they've got to negotiate with the people who were negotiating with us, of course, tended to be the leaders who were elected to the boards of each of these buildings. And the boards felt that they had a fiduciary responsibility to the building as a whole, but the individual personalities, and this is the case in so many co-op boards, bled over from the building to the personal. So you will have people who block or make it very difficult for someone to do alterations. Why? Because their apartment is next door to it and they just don't want it. Or they hire some relative or their own companies to do work in the buildings that might be substandard. Some of the fun board stories always have to do with personal relationships between board members and where board starts sending a tenant shareholder letters giving her fines for harassing the other tenants. And it turns out that the tenant in question was arguing with her neighbor who was the board president. And they really got into a shouting match. But then they start fining the tenant. And now, how do you fight this? All I can say is condos are better in terms of an investment because if they don't like you or they don't like your potential purchaser, they have to buy it. And so the seller always gets their deal. And that rarely happens. It really has to rise to a huge level of discomfort with the potential purchaser to negate a deal, whereas the little fiefdoms come into play and it doesn't work out well for people who have an acrimonious relationship with the board. So too many personalities.
When you went to start, when you opened up your own firm,
Yeah.
did you do for sale condos? You didn't do just action letters.
As a matter of fact, I had done no action letters periodically throughout my career. So offering plans is what everybody knows. Oh, I want to buy an apartment and say it's co-op, it's condo. They give you this big fat book. Your attorney hopefully looks at it, hopefully does due diligence, tells you all the terrible things that are in there, but you make the decision to buy. No action letter condos are, you walk down the street, 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue, wherever in the city, you see these big office buildings. Chances are a bunch of them are condominiums, but not for sale condominiums, not apartments. They're condominiums only for the purposes of real estate tax abatements or exemptions or other incentives for the developer owner of the building. So at least in the city, you can only get one type of tax abatement or exemption per tax lot. So if you have a building that's on one tax lot and it's, 50 stories tall and has a number of offices and retail and stuff, you could only pick and choose one type of tax exemption. Whereas if you divide that existing building into a number of legal different tax lots, maybe the retail unit will get an ICAP. Maybe the residential rental unit sitting atop it will qualify for, God rest its soul, 421A or other similar things. There's heirs for senior living. There are a number of tax abatement and exemption programs that are available in the city, which our firm, Seiden Schein, specializes in, that allow the owner of one property to perhaps take advantage of all of these programs, if they qualify, all in one building, instead of having just one. So walking around, in my mind, I always think of it's Jenga. So it's one building, but like this piece is retail, this piece is residential, this one over here is a community facility piece, this piece is a garage, and each of those may qualify for its own abatement, which will overall help the developer to either make it a more marketable piece because it's got lower taxes, or holding it, operating it, it may own all of the units, no other parties in there. So the board consists of you, and you. It's all the same ownership, but it operates as separate pieces, all within what we look at as think of as one building.
Sounds significantly less dramatic than come-ups.
It absolutely is. The outside parties that you deal with when you convert on a no action letter, which, by the way, just means that the Attorney General will take no action against you for not filing an offering plan. That's what the no action is. We're not taking any action. It's silly in a way, but it is what it says. And by doing that, the Attorney General has a very simplified application. Costs you $30,000 to submit an offering plan to the AG. It's $225 to submit an application for a no action letter. Other costs also, there's legal, there's architect, there's this expert, that expert, but it's a lot less people's hands in the pie, and it's a much more expedited process. And once we file the Attorney General's no action letter and the declaration of condominium and the tax lot drawings with the Department of Finance, record those approved documents, the condo exists. And again, not a physical change in the structure, just a legal change.
Did this concept of no action letters come about simultaneously with condo law?
It's been in Part 23 of the regulations, which is the conversion of occupied properties.
Of course.
Of course.
As we all know.
Which is ridiculous. And every client says, because you have to put in a no action letter saying, we are applying for a no action letter per, the subsection whatever of Part 23, the Attorney General regulations. And it's like, no, this isn't an occupied conversion. Why are we applying on that? Because that is where the no action regulation sits. They keep saying for the last 20 years, we're going to move it to Part 20, which is unoccupied buildings, new development buildings. That's where it should sit, but it's there. It's not a mistake, but it should have been expanded and put into the appropriate place. But that is where the actual regulation says. It's been there from the beginning. There's always been an exemption from having to file an offering plan if you're not going to be selling to the public, to third parties. This is supposed to be for sophisticated purchasers only who don't need the protection of the Martin Act. They know what they're doing. It's commercial transactions. Even though the residential unit in a no action letter condo is a rental unit, the business of the owner of the residential unit is renting out the apartments in there, but those are not for sale condos.
And they could also sell off the commercial piece. Well,
they could sell off each chunk of the Jenga building to different parties, so long as those parties are disclosed in an amendment to the original no action letter to the AG. You have to, each time you do a sale to a third party that is not an affiliate of the existing owner, you have to go to the AG and say, these people don't need your protection. They also sign an affidavit saying, yeah, we don't need your protection. While I have my practice, Jane Rosenberg and I, who have known one another for years, we worked together at Star. I brought her into Star, and then she introduced me to the firm, who used me as an outside counsel to help them with negotiating these very sophisticated declarations for these no action letters with lenders and tenants and all these third parties that had a lot of input into how they wanted the condominium that they were going to be a party to operate. And I was doing that for, I'd say, a year or so. And eventually the firm got tired of paying my hourly and decided to make me an offer I could not refuse.
Now you work here at Seiden Schein. And what's sort of the kinds of things that you do?
So the focus here, I basically head up the no action letter department. Not only the minimum aspects of getting a no action letter approved from the Attorney General's office and then sent through the Department of Finance until we get a recordable document. But all of the action is the drafting of the declaration for how this condominium is going to operate and the rights and obligations of the parties when it's one owner intending to own the entire property in perpetuity. They're just doing it converting its condo so they can get a couple of different tax abatements or exemptions. Simple declaration. Where I have a declaration where there's going to be two parties, everybody and their lenders and their investors has to be happy, making sure that they're protected in the case of an adverse action or condition, and also that they have the rights to control the management of the building, things like that. The things that I did not do before I came here and that I'm loving are leasehold condominiums. If you ground lease a building and the tenant wants to, for tax reasons, like it's a not-for-profit, and wants to get 420A, which would abate its real estate taxes, very important, only the owner of a property can get a 420A tax abatement. Well, the tenant's a tenant, doesn't own it. But in New York, if you have the indices of ownership, you can apply for a 420A. Indices of ownership are for a tenant having a lease that is more than 30 years from the date the leasehold declaration is filed. A lot of our clients are the owners of units where they have leases with major hospitals. The hospital will say, okay, we're going to ground lease this whole building. You can continue on it, but we're leasing it. We're going to turn it into a leasehold condominium because we've got a 35-year lease. Great, easy. We file for a leasehold condominium. Slightly different declaration. It's subordinate to the ground lease in every way, and it's only being done for the tenant to qualify for the 420A real estate tax abatement for no other reason. We also have those instances where the tenant doesn't have the whole building. And so I'm doing one now it's a 10-story building, and the tenant is leasing 9 of those stories. The property owner is maintaining ownership of the commercial unit of the base and leasing out the other 9 stories to a hospital. Well, the hospital wants to get the 428, but it doesn't own the unit it's leasing, but we give it a lease of more than 30 years. And now we go to both the Attorney General and the Department of Finance saying, see this condo unit? We've rented it out. We want to make a leasehold condo based on the tenant's lease within this condo unit. So now it's a leasehold condo in a condo.
When you do these leasehold condos, I guess there's a couple of questions I have to ask. Is the first one is, are these ground leases or leases negotiated beforehand, or are we doing negotiations? Because I've had the experience where there has to be certain language in there in connection with either a loan or how a loan is treated, or with regard to getting a tax exemption or doing inclusionary housing. Specific language has to be included in the ground lease to permit, whatever it is that you need to do.
Yeah, when the client usually comes to us when they are in the process of negotiating the lease or a purchase even, so that we can go over or help them insert the appropriate language covering the eventual condominium, what will happen. And a lot of times, I've been doing 2 of them right now, we have created a couple of pages of what we call condominium principles. In other words, the parties are agreeing in advance what the declaration is going to look like so that we don't go through negotiating the lease. It's in place, and then when we draft the condominium documents, it's not a whole free-for-all, let's renegotiate it. Let's negotiate everything going forward. We're going to think about it from the very beginning, knowing how this is going to end up, and it does an enormous amount to work out all those issues in advance so that once we start the condominium process, it is smoother and much less subject to 50 different people weighing in. We get it all out of the way in the lease.
It's like a term sheet for.
Exactly.
The other thing is, are these leaseholds, are they done generally with new or existing or both? It just happens.
I've just had them with new development, but I can absolutely see it happening where an existing building has been already turned into a condominium, and years in, an office unit is taken over by a not-for-profit who wants to abate its taxes on its unit. They want to apply for 428 as long as they have that 30-plus year lease in place, we can do that.
So there's a lot of synergy, I think, with our tax incentives group, as well as our inclusionary housing group, given that inclusionary housing and tax incentive work together.
Absolutely. And hopefully New York State will find its footing again and understand that making real estate tax abatements and exemptions, those kind of programs available to developers to encourage and make it even viable for them to create housing, commercial, community facility, all these type of spaces that the city and the state need to survive. Give us the programs that we here at the firm are so adept at, and let us help the builders out there get things done to make our city and state more amenable to the people who live and work here.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we discussed this time and time again. It's very important that those sorts of laws be passed to make sure to incentivize housing development.
Yeah. Got to come from somewhere. We all have to share in the pain. And it's not a giveaway to developers say, oh, you don't have to pay taxes. You know, instead, it's not the developers. Everything goes down to the tenants, the owners, the occupants. Everybody's got a hand in it. We share the pain in a way.
We have to be all in it together to create more housing. And right now, there are so many blocks. I couldn't even start to discuss it. You've given us so much information. And I just wanted to ask you one final thing. What are the challenges that you're facing or that you see right now in the type of work that you are doing? I know we talked with Alvin and Jay about tax incentives and 421A not existing anymore, deadline being extended, affordable housing not being available, rents being high, not enough supply, things like that. What are you seeing that's really challenging and preventing you from doing the things that you need to do to help your clients?
Well, unless there's going to be new construction or conversion of older properties to new forms of ownership, and the city's going to get stagnant. The introduction and taking on of Local Law 97, I see, is going to be the next huge problem with the co-ops and condos in the city. While we all want to do our part to reduce carbon footprints, the idea that the city's aging housing stock, which is, we've got a lot of buildings that are more than 100 years old, are going to be required to retrofit their building systems in order to meet standards or pay enormous fines, it's gonna kill the existing owners of properties. And I'm talking not only of apartment buildings that are for rent, but those co-ops and condos that have individual owners, not all of whom are mega billionaires living on 57th Street. How is this going to be feasible? How are these individuals going to be expected to survive and thrive in a city where it's a great idea, I think, for new development to impose whatever science has made available to us to help reduce the carbon footprint, but to impose this on older buildings that have no ability, no money to undertake just doesn't seem feasible. And I see more and more of Albany is just out of sync with what reality is. And economics is, it always comes down to the money, but.
So I think local law, and I personally believe climate change is a problem. I think buildings are the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems in the city, along with, I think, cars and whatever else I can remember from another podcast that I heard about that I listened to, probably the New York Times one, The Daily. But I think I agree with you because my sister-in-law is, lives in a co-op and they're debating this now. And she's not a mega millionaire and it's going to be very costly to do the retrofitting. And I don't know how they're going to even enforce it, to tell you the truth. But what do you see? What do you see happening? How does this get dealt with?
This is going to be owner defaults. So you're going to start to see landlords of buildings, whether it's a co-op board or an individual landlord in the mid-sized to smaller units, outer boroughs, as well as in the city, of older properties. I think the fines will be untenable. Which means that if a fine is imposed against a co-op, the co-op has to then impose it on its shareholders as a special assessment. A bunch of people won't be able to afford it. Now they're in default under their proprietary lease of not paying the maintenance charges, and by the way, then their neighbors have to pick up the slack. The money has to come from somewhere. And then you'll have individual owners, suddenly they're in default, they're going to lose their homes because they won't be able to pay either the co-op board or their lender because of this impact on their pocketbooks. And that, this is the kind of stuff that starts to get people out of the city. This is the kind of thing that happened in, 1989 and 90s stuff. Not only, and there's got to be a little, we call it Rachmanis, having a little sympathy and understanding for how this is going to work. And it's not a giveaway. Oh, the rich housing owners, their penthouse apartments. That's not who's going to be affected by this. It's the little guy. The little guy is what makes up New York.
So the rich buildings are going to be able to afford it.
Yeah. And the newer buildings probably are already more in line with where they want us to be. And certainly new construction going forward is going to be able to include those kind of mechanicals in their buildings, so they won't be subject to it. But these buildings were built when this was state-of-the-art. State-of-the-art changes. But to expect everybody to go back to square one, it's just impossible. And I just see it as being a real problem with the building, because then the next thing you know is that lenders will start saying, well, is that going to become part of my underwriting? Is this building going to be able to meet local law 97 requirements? And then the attorney general is going to say, well, every offering plan, I think they're doing it now. You can check with my colleagues, disclose, well, the big special risk is that local law 97 might cost you an enormous amount of money in the future if you buy an apartment in this older building. So that's going to affect market value. Everything trickles down to individual pocketbooks. It's just, again, it all comes down to when they say that housing is a right. Yes, we all believe that as a whole, as a civilization, everybody should be housed. The question is, where does it come from? Someone's got to pay for it. And when they say they, who's they? And if it's the government, where does the government get money? And if you printed out new money, there's nothing behind it. So I'm sure back in the cave days, there was one guy who was really, really good at carving out a nice space. And everybody else said, ooh, could we come in there? He's like, yeah, but you know what? You go out and you hunt and you give me an extra piece. So I'll stay here and I'll do this. And you get something for nothing. Everybody's got to chip in. Everybody's got to feel the pain. But you got to get out of the mindset that it's going to come from somewhere. It comes from all of us. So
I love how you went from X to Y to Z and how your career evolved. And I'm just
and how it was being one of the few women. But the idea that someone like me, who was very young and was a woman, was suddenly doing all these offering plans and being so active. Crane's magazine came out when they first created the very first issue, had a little article on me, and I had to get a headshot and everything. It was very exciting because it was just so weird that it was like, it would have been like today, like a 13-year-old running a company, but it was weird enough that I was doing such, we were so active.
It was high profile work.
Very high profile.
And there weren't almost any women doing this kind of stuff.
No, there was so few. And now it's more than 50%.
Hillary, like I said, you are an amazing guest. I'm so happy we were able to sit down and chat. And despite us chatting lots, so much about your history and your experience that I didn't know, that I learned so much about you. This didn't even feel like we were doing it just felt like we were chatting. I forgot the microphones were there half of the time.
I'm just hope that there's information that can be useful to anyone in the outside world, which the most important thing is that we not give up in New York, that there will be a turnabout at hopefully soon that will allow us to all continue to grow and thrive as opposed to stagnate. I'm going to have great hope because been through a lot of ups and downs. It used to be almost like 7-year cycle, like it would go up for 5 years and then down for 2 and then up for 5 and down for 2. And then everything went a rave when we hit the 2000s. So let's hope that the end of the down cycle will be over soon.
Amen to that.
Amen.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Hillary.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you joining us.
A pleasure.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@seidenschein.com or visit our website at seidenschein.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@seidenschein.com and Bieslakowski at seidenschein.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.